back to the All Spoiler Recap. I'm Julia Cunningham. You know, we go through a movie beat by beat, like an audio book of a film. And there's one that I reference a lot. It is a regular as part of my day job on the Jess Cagle show at SiriusXM. Somehow this movie comes up at least once a week, and we were honored actually when an actor from the film joined us on the show recently. But let me get to my guest first. I'm Julia Cunningham, by the way. Welcome to the All Spoiler Recap. Gary Gorman, who was a guest from episode 67, The Wolf of Snow Hollow. An excellent episode. Go back and listen to that. But Gary, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks, Julia. Really excited to be back on the show. As you know, avid listener of the pod, and it's really exciting for me because the last time we did it on the episode you referenced, I was fully aware of the movie we were doing.
Yes, I think you suggested that we do it.
It was one of my favorite movies in the last couple of years, horror movies, and love that. But excited today because I have no idea what the movie is going to be and don't know what's going to be in the mystery box. So
yeah, I used to let people like suggest movies and I would let them be the guest, but then we kind of got away from that. Now I keep, even like a close friend like Gary Gorman, I keep in the dark. We're actually going back into the vault of 2015 to another beautiful Jennifer Lopez movie. You know, she is an all-star figure within the All Spoiler Recap. I love everything she does on screen, including the film The Boy Next Door. Have you seen this movie, Gary?
I haven't seen this movie.
Oh my God, it's so good.
Okay.
It's literally a classic, even though it sits at 12% on Rotten Tomatoes. It should be 1,200% on Rotten Tomatoes. It stars Jennifer Lopez and Ryan Guzman, who is kind of like a breakout. This was like one of his first real projects that he did. This was like credit number 2 on his IMDb, but he's this handsome young man who they go so far out of their way to say that he's not under the age of 18 to make it acceptable that J-Lo bangs the boy next door. Spoiler alert. So he's 20, quote unquote, in this movie. He's now on, I believe, 911, so still actively working, got a great career, but this is where we first meet him. And we had Ryan Guzman on the show recently on the Jess Cagle show, and I don't want to pre-spoil for you, Gary, but we had a long discussion about a specific scene from The Boy Next Door, which we'll get to when we get there. The movie was directed by Rob Cohen, who also directed The Skulls, which I can't believe I've not done an all spoiler recap with Joshua Jackson that came out back in the 90s, and of course the very first Fast and the Furious film. So really elevated material for the all spoiler recap at the hands of Rob Cohen. So we're going to go ahead and jump in. The movie begins with a blurred image of what looks like a hiking path here in Los Angeles. Not, I would say, most likely Runyon Canyon, but like Griffith Observatory, you know, like one of the windy, woodsy type paths. And we see a figure. Clearly, the figure's hot. We can see the shape. It's J-Lo running in a blurred image, and we get our all caps Arial font of Universal Pictures Presents. We cut immediately to a black screen, all cap letters, but the first letter, slightly larger font than anything else, The Boy Next Door. This black screen has the outlines of 2 houses next door to each other, almost like a blueprint image, more 3D than that. But clearly that kind of vibe of literally the 2 houses next door to each other. Like, we know what the point of the movie is. We cut back to the hiking path, no longer blurry, but a panting and running Jennifer Lopez, our all spoiler recap goddess, with an iPod strapped to her arm, 2015, corded headphones, and running. And as she's running and she's like, she's really giving it her all, because she's J-Lo. And as she runs, we get this VO from John Corbett, a.k.a. Aiden from Sex and the City. And he says, I just want to come home, J-Lo. Please let me come home. And we cut to this image of them in a kitchen. And he's clearly a businessman. He's in a full suit. And she turns away from him in this off-shoulder sweater. And she says, just get out, get out. And we see him leaving out the front door. And as he closes the door, we see one opening, a beautiful camera trick, Fast and the Furious. And we see her walking into a separate room, crying. Again, we cut back to her running. And again, this time narration from her son. Don't tell me Dad's not coming back. Don't tell me that. And he gets up and storms off from the table, and she's reaching for him, Kevin, as he pulls away and leaves her. We cut back to J-Lo, still running. She finally gets up to a turning point of the running path. They couldn't find a beautiful running path in Los Angeles with just a simple fork in the road. No, she has to run past and stop at a garbage can. She stops. And we know she has really run through her emotions because at this point, within that 47-second montage of those moments, she's drenched in sweat, like can barely walk. She's just run so hard. And we cut to another moment, this time with her best friend, Kristen Chenoweth, who is not even 5 feet tall. Somehow J-Lo, who's very petite, is a giant next to Kristen Chenoweth. And she's holding her arm, and for some reason they're walking into a barn. But the shot is above, where we're looking from like the rafters of a barn, and we see this old rusty engine hanging from the roof. We can barely even see them because this engine is taking up 90% of the shot. And we see them walking in as Kristen says, you have got to get those divorce papers. You've got to get them signed. You need to move on, J-Lo. It's been 9 months. We see them outside of the barn. And what's next door, this White House, it's seemingly a farm in the middle of nowhere type energy. And they're no longer in the murder barn, which why were they even walking in there? And they're now sitting over coffee and seemingly a piece of pie or something. And they're discussing the divorce. And Kristen Chenoweth has the most severe structured pixie cut that I have seen. It's as if like a Kate Gosselin pixie cut, but it's not spiked up in the back, but it's very severe and structured. And J-Lo reveals that she's having dinner with her ex, John Corbett. And she's like, why? Why would you be doing that? Why do you still let him worm his way in even after 9 months? And she's like, well, it's Kevin's birthday. And Kristen Chenoweth literally is like, you pussy. Screams at a J-Lo. So she throws her arms up in the air, and Kristen like gets up and storms away like, I can't believe you're doing this. And there's light pouring through her blue pattern silk blouse, 2015 to a T. She's got low-rise whiskered True Religion jeans on, flared, obviously. And I'm like, is this a period piece to 2008? Where are we right now? And J-Lo says, sometimes I think you're rooting against us. Who is us? You and me or you and him? Because I thought you two were done. And she says, he's the father of my kid. Kristen Chenoweth says, yeah, who cheats with his secretary every time he goes to the home office. Brings a whole new meaning to San Francisco treat, don't you think? J-Lo is so upset by this. Like, how dare you weaponize things I have told you against my husband? It's like, this is just being your supportive friend. She gets up and she slams her hot body over into a side table and throws her pie down. And clearly, Kristen is going on. She's not reading the angry body language. She goes on. She's like, basically rereading emails that J-Lo must have forwarded to her or like let her read from John Corbett that were clearly interactions between him and the secretary. And J-Lo's not happy about the exchange at all. But Kristen is like, well, what do you think that he would call his secretary that she smelled like chocolate chip cookies? Which, like, ew, why were you even saying that in emails? Like, you smell like chocolate chip cookies. That's so gross. But also feels very PG for an affair. Anyways, she goes, for your information, he does not go to San Francisco anymore. And she just stares at her. And it's like, well, you just showed your supportive friend who's boss, J-Lo. Look, either you want to bitch and complain about your husband or you don't. You have to make the decision. That night at home, we see the family from outside the living room window. And John Corbett and J-Lo are celebrating their son. J-Lo makes a cake from scratch because she's obviously perfect. And John Corbett walks over to Kevin and is like, I want you to open your gift. And on the end of this dining room table, the three of them are on the end eating cake. They walk to the other side of the table. And there's this shape of a mountain because literally it's not gift wrapped. It's a sheet over this gift with a bow on it. And together, he's like, help me. And the father and the son, who's not 7, by the way, he's like in high school, they lift the sheet together, unveiling, are you ready for it? a desktop computer.
The size of a minivan.
Like, truly massive. Massive in a way that I was like, are these cool? What's happening? But it's not just any desktop computer because they know the reaction is going to be exactly what I just did. A desktop computer? Didn't we have laptops? Like, yes, I had a laptop in college. I graduated in 2007. What is happening? But it's not just any desktop computer gifted in 2015. It's a 2-monitor, high-powered gaming tower with an Arctic cooler attached because obviously this thing is going to explode if you plug it in. Also, like, what games are still being played on desktops? Are they in 2015? I don't even understand. Apparently, John Corbett made it himself. Eek! And the family sit back down to enjoy the cake that J-Lo slaved over. When John Corbett says, look, I think we should go camping like the old days. We've been having a lot of fun together. I think it'd be really nice. And I'm like, the old days is when you were banging your secretary? What are you talking about? It sounded like your relationship was terrible. And of course, her son, who's like basically a freshman in high school, is like, can we, Mom? As if the son is 8. And she goes, you know what? You have schmutz on your hand. He has a dollop of frosting the size of a quarter on his hand. Enough that you would just, lick it off. But he heads to the kitchen to wash his hands of the frosting that's on his hands. Meanwhile, J-Lo has the same amount of frosting on her thumb. She licks it off her hand. And she's like, well, when and where? What are you thinking for the camping trip? And he's like, well, I have this business trip. I'd be home on Thursday. I could scoop you guys up and we could drive and, go to Mammoth or whatever. And she goes, oh, business trip? Let me guess, San Francisco? And he's like, it's work. It's not what you think. And she's like, well, does she still work there? And John Corbett says, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The woman that you're banging is still working there? Of course it matters to J-Lo. In this moment, Kevin walks in and she says that the weekend before school, you guys should do that trip together. I'm going to have a lot of work. We learn in this moment that J-Lo teaches at the high school that her son is about to start at. And Kevin and John Corbett both have disappointed faces, but J-Lo's like, you guys do you, and it'll be a really nice trip for the two of you. Cut to her literally crying in the bathroom. The next day, J-Lo is yelling to her son to hurry up. They open the single-car garage door, and it keeps going up and down, up and down. It's clearly jammed. And this garage is literally the size for one car. And weirdly, inside the garage, there's like one window off to it. It just felt like we need to have some sort of situation. It feels like they built that garage last minute on a set. Like, how do we get this together? The door keeps trying to go up and down. It's jammed. J-Lo puts her head back and is like, not today, Satan. And her son comes out and is like, let's just skip it. I don't want to go to a doctor. I just feel like he's going to tell us the same thing we hear every time. And J-Lo's like, absolutely not. It took me forever to get this appointment. He is the best allergist in the valley. We're going. You help me. I'm going to lift the door. You keep pulling the cord. Let's see if we can get this door to unjam. So he's standing up in the car on the ledge, trying to pull the world's tiniest red string attached to the garage door opener, trying to pull it, which, like, honestly, you would break it. That's how, like, he's yanking it, and it's not budging, of course. She's trying to push the garage door up, and she's like, it's too heavy, pull harder. And he's like, I'm pulling. And then out of nowhere, this jacked bicep emerges out of the corner of our screen. Tan. The bicep is the size of a football under an arm, and a white sleeve kind of pushed up, and it just pushes the door up with one hand. I got it, says Ryan Guzman, literally the titular boy next door. J-Lo is shaken to her core by the hotness. It emerged out of nowhere. She wasn't ready for it. And he turns to her, and he smiles, and he says, I can fix that if you want. And she goes, and you are? Then out of nowhere, this elderly man in a wheelchair appears and screams, my nephew! Everyone turns like, where did you come from? And Ryan Guzman reveals that he moved in to help his great uncle because he's getting, and as the old man says, a bone marrow transport. And Ryan Washington goes, transplant, uncle old person, transplant. And he immediately steps in. He says, let me fix that garage door for you. He introduces himself to her son. He looks up at it. And even just with the naked, hot eye, he says, it's not a jam. The clutch needs to be fixed in your garage door. And he turns to Kevin. He goes, why don't you come with me? We'll go to the hardware store. We'll pick up everything we need. How about we do that? And he turns to his mom and is like, Mom, we're already going to be late for my doctor's appointment. Can't I just go? And she's like, fine. Because she's excited clearly that he's made a friend with the super hot guy next door. They take off for the hardware store. The uncle announced, she's like, wow, he seems like a really good guy. Not like a guy that's going to probably stalk me and try and kill my whole family. He seems great. And the uncle says, yeah, unfortunately, his parents died last year. I'm all he's got now. And I thought it was really sweet that he wanted to come here and help me. And, I'm his only family. And she's like, wow, he seems like a really good guy. Want to get coffee? So they go inside to have coffee. Meanwhile, as they're making their way into the hardware store, Kevin asks Ryan Guzman, how old are you? He goes, well, I'm almost 20. I was from San Bernardino. I was taking school there, but my great uncle needed some help and I had this rough year. And so I missed a lot of school. And so I'm going to actually take more classes here and get everything wrapped up. And he's like, oh, cool. So you're in college? And he's like, no, I'll be finishing at your high school, even though he's turning 20. Okay. Guys, we got to make sure J-Lo's allowed to bang him. Okay. He's 20 remember that he is not under 18. Also, he looks 30, but in a hot way. So he's like, yeah, there was this accident last time. I'm going to finish up Monroe High School. And he's like, oh my God, that's where I go. And my mom, hot J-Lo, who you just met, she teaches there. And he's like, no way. She seems way too cool to be a teacher, as in coded for she's too hot. And he's like, she is cool for like a mom, So they walk in to the hardware store and they walk up to the cash register. And Kevin cannot handle that the most beautiful girl in school is working at the cash register. He literally is flustered. He's like about to drop all the screws and the bolts and all this, I don't know, the clutch. What is that? And Ryan Guzman is like, dude, she already saw you. Just go up and talk to her. And he's like, I can't. He's like, just go up there and pay for everything. Like, stop acting like a freak. You got this. So he goes up and he's all like nervous. And he's like bumbling about. And then Ryan, hot AF, walks up behind him and he kind of puts his arm around him to be like, we're together. And he's like, hey, I don't think we've met. I'm Ryan. I'm really good friends with Kevin. Like, it's so nice to meet you. And then, of course, she's instantly like, oh, wow, you must actually be cool because that hot guy is with you. So, of course, she's like, oh, yeah, cool. Starts talking to him. And as they're talking, these three bonehead idiots roll into the hardware store on their skateboard, so obviously they're jerks. And this hardware store sells, naturally, hardware things. Screws and clutches and other things that a hardware store would sell, but also randomly skate decks. There's an entire wall of skate decks, which these nerds roll in to look at. And they turn and they see Kevin standing at the cash register. And they're immediately like, oh, look who it is. And they head over to Kevin and they call him the Whiz because apparently he has asthma. And so they call him the Whiz.
Oh, that's great.
Classic. Like, what is even happening? What year is it? How old are these kids? And eventually the hot girl is like, get out of here and stop messing around. And they leave. And Ryan Guzman takes note of all of this. They go home. And he's fixing the garage door, obviously looking hot. He's overly flexing while he's literally just tightening a screw. And J-Lo walks out looking hot like J-Lo and literally hands him a glass of lemonade. And Ryan says, hey, we were just, at the hardware store, and these nerds came in and they were kind of bullying Kevin and they called him the Whiz. And she's like, oh my God, well, he has like all these allergy issues and he has asthma. And there was an incident like last summer where he was stung by a bee and his throat swelled up and he panicked. He like lost control. He didn't know what to do. He was freaking out. And basically, he peed his pants. And Ryan is like, kids can be so cruel. She's like, don't tell him I told you. It's like he's very sensitive about it. And he now travels with his EpiPen because, we're just trying to get it all under control. And Ryan Guzman is like, don't worry. You can trust me. I would never say anything. And she nods like, hot. Anyways, the garage door works. And that night she's reading a book. She's in a chair in her bedroom. She's all curled up. She's got her glasses on and her low ponytail because we're in our education zone, J-Lo. And she's wearing an oversized nightgown t-shirt which is dangling off one shoulder. And as she stands up to go and close her blinds and her curtains, it has a slit up the side that is so high, it's borderline up to her belly button, where anyone else would have full exposed vagina in the film, and yet J-Lo pulls it off. This slit is so high. She goes to close the curtain of the bedroom, and she sees hot Ryan Guzman helping his great uncle into bed, where he literally is lifting him, getting him tucked in, and he literally kisses his great uncle on the forehead. And J-Lo is like, God, he's hot and so thoughtful. Look at him catering to that old man. The next day, Ryan Guzman is helping Kevin and showing him how to build a car, and they're bonding, and it's quick friends. And J-Lo loves seeing this because clearly he gets bullied in school, even though J-Lo's hot as hell, and he's making a friend, and she's enjoying, and she's watching out the window just like hot. You can tell she's constantly like, God, he's so hot. Lots of shots of his body and looking up and him smiling at her. And that afternoon, J-Lo and Kevin and Kristen Chenoweth comes over and Ryan Guzman, they have lunch or dinner or something like that. And they're barbecuing, and she goes, look, I think it's incredible what you're doing for your uncle. But, when he goes off to get his bone marrow transplant, I don't want you just alone in that house. Like, you are more than welcome to have dinner with us every night. I cook. I love to bake. Like, I don't want you feeling isolated in that house. And I'm thinking, shouldn't he be taking care, like visiting his uncle in the hospital? And I think he'll be okay. I mean, he's a hot young man. I'm sure he'll find a date, J-Lo. Anyways, he's like, that's so kind of you. I don't want to impose, but also I do want to impose on your literature class if you don't mind, because I'm going to be going to Monroe High. And she's like, what? Oh my God, my class? And Kevin's like, you do not want to do that. They call her the Crusher. She's really tough. And they all laugh. And Kristen Chenoweth is like, there's something weird about him. They go inside. She's like, he's way too hot and nice, and he wants to study like the classics. You teach like classics in high school, and he's interested in that. There's something, I can't put my finger on it. He's fine and nice, but there's something odd.
She needs to stop being so negative. He's
Totally.
obviously perfect. He's obviously
He's
perfect.
definitely not going to literally slit people's throats at all.
No,
Like, totally a
no.
gentleman. And so again, she's like studying literature. Ryan Guzman walks in and goes, yeah, literally the classics. In San Bernardino, we were studying the Odyssey, and it was so awesome. Like, who says that? And J-Lo goes, I'm teaching Homer next semester. And he's like, oh my God, he's my favorite. Please. Kevin and Kristen Chenoweth are both like, you've got to be joking. And he turns to him and he says, dude, you gotta read the Iliad. Okay, they should be teaching this movie in schools. So he goes, Achilles is a total badass. He's like hot-tempered and full of pride and completely consumed by his emotions. And J-Lo and Ryan have this back and forth about the Iliad. It's a really bonding moment between these two well-read hot people. And he's like, Homer's a genius, Kevin. Just like Shakespeare and Byron and Zeppelin and Dylan. And J-Lo looks at him. She goes, ugh, poets. And he says back to her, poets. They literally stare into each other's eyes. The next day, we hear a car rev. It's John Corbett leaving for Labor Day weekend. He just had his business trip. He pulls up to pick up Kevin, and he's driving like a purple looking Mustang Charger. You know what I mean? One of those sort of like douchey, like, why do you have a purple kind of car? Really stands out. And, he drives off. And J Lo is like watching her son get into the car and they're driving off for the weekend. And Ryan is watching as he's cleaning out the gutters and he's watching as J Lo's so sad. So we cut to her inside working on her laptop, just looking like a sexy librarian. And there's a box with a set of heels sitting on the coffee room table. And the heels are like not very J-Lo. They're like red straps, and the heel is like bright gold, and like where your toes would go into has like a cow print. Like they're really just like kind of trashy looking, just not like what we've seen of the vibe of J-Lo. And Ryan Guzman walks in and she goes, "Oh my God, Ryan, actually Kevin just left with his father. I'm sorry you missed him. He's going to be gone for the weekend." And he goes, "Oh, actually, I got something for you." And she's like, "For me?" And she stands up and he hands her a copy of the Iliad. And she laughs. She's like, "Oh my God, stop." And she opens it and she goes, "Is this a first edition? Like, I can't, this must have been so expensive." And we're like, we had to ask Ryan Guzman about this scene, which every once in a while makes its way to the internet where people lose their minds because, quote, a first edition of the Iliad would be literally like a stone tablet or someone's voice, because that is like before the Bible. There's no first edition of the Iliad. It would be in a museum. And my friend Emily, who hosts Tasteless Podcast, always says, she's like, why would he get his oily hands all over this museum quality piece? And he tells her, don't worry, it was $1 at a garage sale. One man's trash, he says. Oh yeah, one man's trash, the Iliad. Ryan Guzman, I can't. She stands up like, please, no, I can't take this. It's too much. And he puts his hands on her hands on top of the first edition of the Iliad, just crushing hand oils into it. And he says, I'm here every single night. It would mean so much to me. Please take it. She's like, holds it. She's like, thank you. She sits back down and he looks down at the hideous heels and he's like, are those yours? She goes, oh my God, no, they were a gift from Kristen Chenoweth. And he's like, oh, good, because I mean, those kinds of shoes are for women like trying to be sexy and you don't need to try. And she's like, like me? And he's like, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that. And she's like, no, it's okay, it's fine. And he walks out the door. That night, J-Lo is now in a flesh-colored nighttime silk romper, as you wear to sleep. And she puts on her trashy heels and is staring at herself in the mirror like, am I sexy? Me, J-Lo, flawless being J-Lo. And she sees Ryan Guzman completely naked, ass and all, across the way in his bedroom. And she's embarrassed. She immediately is like, oh my God, I can't believe I just saw the boy next door naked. Exactly. And Gary just did the like looking through his fingers. And she kind of hides behind her curtain, like closes it. And he, of course, notices that she's there looking. He knows what he's doing. And she kind of then, of course, peeks back over. And they stare at each other until she turns away and closes the blinds. The next day, we find out that J-Lo is going on a double date with Kristen Chenoweth, and she's not having fun. Kristen Chenoweth has some awful cop boyfriend, and her setup is this guy who's just very condescending about her being a teacher. Not just being a teacher, but the fact that she's teaching classics. He's like, who cares about classics? No one's going to learn anything from that. And like is staring at waitresses' breasts and all sorts of stuff. And J-Lo's like, you know what? You're disgusting, and storms out of the date. And she gets back home and she's still in her black silk shirt dress. And she's just slamming back glasses of wine. And she picks up a chocolate chip cookie and smells it. being like, do I smell like this? Like that secretary. She's all bummed out. And at that moment, Ryan Guzman calls her and is like, so I tried to like defrost a chicken in the microwave and like I think part of it's cooked, but part of it isn't. And can I eat the part that is cooked? Is that okay? And she's like, "Oh my God, Ryan, no." And he's like, "Can you come bail me out? I don't know what I'm doing." She goes over there and they eat and they talk and they eat, by the way, allegedly, the portion of the chicken he did defrost, which I'm like, you're going to kill yourself, but that's fine. And he hits on her and he's like, "You're just so beautiful." And she gets up and is like, "I should leave." And he grabs her. He's like, "No." And he's like, "J-Lo, kiss me." And she's like, "I can't." And he's like, "No, I know you feel this. I saw you watching me from the weekend when I was naked and hot in my room all alone." And she's like, "This cannot happen. I'm a teacher. I'm a sexy librarian. I have a son. This is wrong."
But you are 20.
But you're 20. I can legally do this. Looks at camera. He's 20, not under 18. And he's like, "Let me love you." And she's being like, "No, no." But of course he's making out with her. And then they bang. Bang City for a very long sequence of Ryan Guzman and J-Lo banging it out at that great old uncle's musty old house and his disgusting couch. They're all over it, banging. The next morning, J-Lo falls asleep on said musty old couch, wrapped up in a blanket. She literally like pulls on her underwear, is like still wrapped up in a blanket. Ryan Guzman walks in with coffee and orange juice on a tray because he's like, "We don't eat liquids only, just coffee, black coffee and an orange juice." He's like, borderline 0 calorie, enough sugar from the orange juice, and that's all you'll get. And she's like, "Oh my God, no, I have to go home." And he's like, "Oh my God, but I poured you orange juice," as if he's giving her a diamond. And he's like, "Don't have second thoughts." He puts it down. He like holds onto her. He's like, "Do not have second thoughts about this. What we did is normal. It's totally fine." She's like, "Nothing about this is normal. Where's my coat?" I'm like, "Where's your coat? Where are your clothes, J-Lo?" J-Lo tries to rush out and is like, "This is on me. I'm an adult. And even though you're 20, I'm the one that should have known. I should have stopped it last night." He's like, "Stop, stop. What we did wasn't wrong. No matter what you say, it wasn't wrong." She's like, "I wasn't thinking clearly. I was vulnerable and you're very sweet." And he's like, "No." And she's like, "It was so flattering. And I love that you want to bang me, but no. It was more than that," he says. "It was more than that." And his eyes are racing. And she's like, "No." And he turns. So he's not facing her, but enough to the side and punches the door frame. And is like, "God damn it." And he punches the door frame. J-Lo is like, "No, God." His hand is a bloody mess. She sits him down. She's taking care of his hand. She's cleaning it up. And she's like, "Look, we shouldn't have done that. I was feeling incredibly vulnerable." And he's like, "How can you say that to me? Last night was perfect. Last night was perfect. And in time, you'll see it. And it's true. We're meant to be together." And she's like, "No, like, we're not going to be together. I'm saying it's like I was vulnerable and I'm being honest. Like, no, this isn't going to be a thing. Like, we're not dating and banging." And he's like, "Well, just leave. Go." And he gets all upset. She's like, "Okay, I've been trying to. Thank you." She leaves. Later that day, John Corbett arrives home with Kevin. And they're like, "We caught 7 trouts." And she's like, "Wow, great. Oh, I banged the neighbor. He might be psychotic. I can't tell." John Corbett's like, "How about I stay for dinner?" And she's like, "Sure." And they're telling her this story. And you can tell her mind is racing. She's barely listening. Kevin's like, "I saw this really cool video on YouTube where this one guy who was out in the woods cooked dinner on a shovel. So we did that." And I'm like, "What?" Meanwhile, she's like, "Uh-huh." Like totally mind racing. She's like, "Ha, ha, ha, ha." She's like, "How about pie?" She goes into the kitchen. She's clearing all the dishes. And she hears Ryan Guzman arrive. And is like, "Hey, guys, I'm Ryan Guzman." And she's like, "Ah!" Like throws the pie in the air. And John Corbett, of course, is like, oh my God, I've heard so much about you. Please come sit down. And JLo's losing her mind. She walks back out, and Ryan Guzman goes, JLo, did you tell everyone about what you did over the weekend? Like about our weekend? And she's like, oh my God. Well, it rained so hard. It was like a really bad storm. You guys, did you get that where you were camping? She's like putting down pie. And they're like, oh my God, no, it was dry as a bone. And Ryan Guzman jumps in and is like, it got pretty wet here.
Yes.
Classic. JLo wants to die, of course. She's like, ah, throwing pie around. Ryan finally leaves, and JLo's like, school's starting tomorrow. We should probably wrap this up. Kevin, you got homework? And he's like, Mom, it's the first day of school. I don't have homework. And she's like, get upstairs. Ryan picks up a cookie on his way out and literally says, I love your mom's cookie. I mean, come on. Shakes John Corbett's hand. JLo wants to die. Later, JLo and John Corbett are walking out and they're taking out the garbage. And she says, look, we're in limbo. What are we doing? What do you want? What is this? And he's like, look, I'm not seeing her anymore. And she goes, I know, but like, you might as well be, because I'm just always going to think you are. And I don't want to live that way. And you shouldn't live that way. And we should be in a place where I don't just assume you're cheating on me at all times. And John Corbett's like, look, it wasn't about her. It was about us. We were broken. We were both checked out. And I'm not saying what I did was right. It wasn't. It was stupid. I ruined our family. But like, smart people make mistakes too. Big mistakes, dumb mistakes. Like, haven't you ever made a mistake? And you can tell she wants to go, yes, I just banged the neighbor. Okay, I did. Yes, I have made a mistake. But she's like, And he says, look, just don't throw our marriage away. Don't file. Let's just take some time. And I'm like, haven't you been separated for 9 months? And then he walks her back inside as Ryan Guzman is, of course, watching. It's the first day of school, and JLo is teaching Homer's Iliad, obviously. And in walks the principal, being like, oh my God, JLo, I've just been doing orientation with our new student. I approved your request for Ryan to sit in on your class. Ryan Guzman. Meanwhile, her face is like, Meanwhile, he stomps in with like a denim shirt and a tie and like this professor sweater, spouting Achilles. He comes in going, no man or woman born coward or brave can shun his destiny. And the class is all like, what? But of course the girls are like, ooh. JLo is like, absolutely not. She's like, sit down. She goes chasing after the principal. She goes, excuse me, what is going on? He is a senior, a transfer senior, and this is a class for juniors. And he's like, well, here's the form. You requested it. She looks at this form and is like, oh, it's clearly forged. Computers. At the end of the day, she's like, quit following me. He's like, I'm not following you. I live next door, JLo. She's like, ugh. She gets home and she looks at her computer and she's looking at this form that she allegedly sent from her email. And this form takes up the entire screen of the computer. It's like, talk about size 72 font. And she asked Kevin, he's like walking in. She goes, oh my God, Kevin, did you send anything from my email? And he's like, what? No. And he runs upstairs and Ryan is standing right there and he goes, ooh, sounds like you were hacked. You should probably change your password. I can help you with that if you need it. And she's like, I don't need help with that. Kevin heads out with Ryan. And she's like, look, Kevin, we're back at school now. We need to be focused. I don't think Ryan should come to dinner tonight. And Kevin's like, I think that's rude, but fine, whatever. They go next door. And Ryan is telling him how his great uncle was a sergeant in the military. He was in Vietnam. And he's like, I want to show you this. And he pulls out this old giant gun. And is like, I'm going to teach you how to shoot. Oh my God. So they drive off to the middle of nowhere and they're shooting at pumpkins. And of course, Kevin, who is 15 and yet 8, is literally, his arm is like shooting the gun. It's like flailing all over the place. Like he's going to shoot somebody. Meanwhile, Ryan is just like, boom, 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 and like takes out every pumpkin. He's like, wow. And as they're driving home, Ryan is obviously trying to turn Kevin against his father. he's like, your dad seems like a slime bomb, just like going after all these young women. He's probably having a midlife crisis. And he's like, your dad is just bribing you with things like a desktop computer and all this stuff. And that night, when they're sitting down at dinner, Kevin is very distant towards his father. And John
Mm.
Corbett was like, what did you think of your computer class today? Like, I bet you loved it. And he's like, I dropped computer class because I think it's stupid. I'm going to take boxing. And they're like, what? Then he all of a sudden like starts to rage on his father. And he's like, you know what, Dad? You've been gone for 9 months. And now you just act like everything is fine.
And
they're
don't
all
get me
like,
started with that purple car.
oh, totally. Midlife crisis. And J-Lo and Kevin are both like, or excuse me, John Corbett are like, what's happening? But he's like, maybe I should give him some space. Maybe too much too soon. I'm like, too much too soon? It's been 9 months. Where were you? So the next day, Ryan has Kevin punching bags, like a boxer would. And they're getting worked up and he's talking. He's still, of course, pushing him about his dad, being like, your dad's a slime ball. You should probably know that he's, just like using your mom as a meantime girl. And Kevin's like, meantime girl? What does that mean? He's like, like banging her now in the meantime until he finds someone new and young. And Kevin's like, how would he treat my mom that way? And starts like violently punching the bag. So much so that he all of a sudden turns asthmatic and literally like passes out, borderline seizuring. He's like flailing on the ground. He's instantly covered in hives. He like can't catch his breath. His face is red.
Is there whiz involved? Is
The
question.
whiz! Oh my God, he has not urinated yet, but you can tell he's losing control of his body. Ryan runs to his locker and pulls out his EpiPen as Kevin's face erupts. And I'm like, shouldn't he have an inhaler? Do EpiPens work in this sort of scenario? I thought those were like bees. I have no idea. Scientists, doctors, email me. allspoilerrecap@gmail.com. Are EpiPens used for asthmatic purposes? So he runs over and he has the EpiPen and he's got it like over his chest. And he's like, do I hit it? Do I punch it into your heart? And someone from the back is like, in his leg. So he jams it into his thigh and he instantly is like, and Ryan pulls him up and embraces him and basically, saves his life, even though he also caused it. Meanwhile, J-Lo is in the break room looking like a sexy hot librarian. And Kristen Chenoweth delivers a bouquet of flowers and the card reads, please give me another chance. And Kristen Chenoweth is like, tell me you're not going to. She's like, you know what? I don't know. Like all of these things, we all have things that we wish we wouldn't have done. Like how I didn't mean to bang the neighbor. And maybe you should start worrying about yourself for a change and don't meddle anymore. And she's like, fine, 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 fine. So she calls John Corbin. She's like, oh my God, thank you for the flowers. That was so nice of you. And he's like, flowers? What flowers are you talking about? She's like, oh my God, I will call you right back. She hangs up and she finds Ryan Guzman, who of course is in the boxing gym doing jujitsu and all sorts of stuff. Like, I am hot and a black belt in karate potentially. And he's overly beating the bag. And she's like, I need to talk to you. And he's like, I'm busy. She's like, Ryan Guzman, those flowers, what were you thinking? This is my place of business. And what do you think this looks like? I can't be getting flowers from a student.
Even though he's 20 years old?
He's 20. I could legally bang him. And he goes, well, I didn't sign the card. And she goes, you hacked my email. And he's like, well, you said I could be in your class. So whatever. And she's like, you turned Kevin against his father. And he's like, can't blame me. It's his own actions. And he puts his hand on her arm and she pushes him back. And in that moment, there's a teacher, of course, looking through the gym window who's like, suspect behavior between student and adult, even though he's 20 and I'm not sure what to do about this scenario. And he goes, by the way, you didn't thank me for saving your son. And she's like, thank you, by the way. Like, ugh, whatever. In that moment, the adult walks in and is like, are you okay? And she's like, yes, we're just having a conversation. Thank you. And she goes, let's start over, okay? And he's like, let's start over. He's like, look, you can trust me. And he kind of smiles, nods, sort of like a Don't worry about it. She's like, thank you. She turns and walks away. Meanwhile, Kevin has built up his confidence hanging out with hot Ryan Guzman and asks out the hardware store girl and is like, hey, would you want to go to a movie? And she's like, I've been working nights at the hardware store. I can't go to the movies with you. And he's like, okay. And he turns and starts to walk away. And Ryan Guzman makes his way around the corner. And then she yells to him, but I don't have a date to the fall fling. And he's like, oh my God, I could be your date. And she's like, yeah, I know. And he's beyond stoked. And so they're like, okay, we'll go together. That night, J-Lo returns home from having a date or dinner with John Corbett. And he walks her inside and they kiss. And she's like, look, I want us to be on the same page, but I'm like not ready for that. And he's like, okay, let's start on a totally clean slate. She's like, look, I need time. We can't just jump right in. We need to kind of like court again. He's like, I agree. But he's also like, I feel like I've had too many wines. Can I just sleep on the couch? And she's like, totally. So he sleeps on the couch, and Ryan Guzman sees that his car is parked outside overnight.
Mm.
And that night, he's in his room staring at the car, and he starts.
Is he naked? Is he naked again at this point?
At this point, he's like in a like a white tank top, but he's enraged, thinking about banging J-Lo naked and just like trying to read the Iliad, but he can't. He keeps thinking about J-Lo naked. And then he's like, I'm trying to do air punches, but I can't. I'm thinking about naked J-Lo. And I'm furious. I stay up all night enraged that her husband's car is parked outside. The next morning, they walk out, and John Corbett is like, don't give up on us. And she's like, I'm not. And they have this really nice moment, and he drives off. And she yells, Kevin, let's go. In that moment, Ryan Guzman somehow comes flying out of his parking spot 5 steps in front of her house. The car is like, vroom, and then stops because it's like out of a cartoon, violently from 0 to 100 miles per hour that only goes forward 5 steps. And he literally goes, you whore. He's like, let's make a deal. Let's start over. You're playing me, J-Lo. And she's like, you are unhinged, and I see what you're doing. And she's like, he goes, you're a liar, and I am seeing clearly now. And he storms off being like, game on. And he gets into his car. And Kevin emerges being like, what happens? And she turns to him and she goes, you need to stay away from Ryan Guzman. Trust me. He's a bad influence. And Kevin is immediately upset. He's like, he's my friend, and he's a good friend. He's my only friend. And he's so cool. And because he's hot, he gets me stuff. And he's furious with J-Lo. And she's like, you watch your mouth and you get in the car. He said you would do this. He's been right all along about you. And he storms off and he's like, I'm going with Ryan Guzman. As he gets in the car, Ryan screams, see you at school. At school, Kevin is at his locker when the skateboard bullies emerge. And the main redhead comes at Kevin as if like, I'm going to beat him up. Like with the intention of, I'm going to like at least shove you into a locker.
Also, by the way, it's always a redhead. It's always like the redhead bully.
It's always a redhead bully. And when I looked up to be like, this guy kind of looks familiar. He had been in some Disney, Nickelodeon type stuff, and then ended up serving some time for like an armed robbery. And it looks like he really hit some bad places, seemingly sober now and living a great life, worth noting. So, so he is making his way towards in shoving zone of our sweet Kevin when Ryan emerges out of nowhere and beats the shit out of this kid. Like literally is like slamming him, beating him up, punching his face. Kristen Chenoweth comes out of nowhere to break up the fight. She gets in the crosshairs and thrown onto the ground. He literally then pulls the kid up from off the ground and starts slamming him face first into a locker until finally a man subdues him. They end up in the office and Kristen Chenoweth is grilling him. She's like, I looked up your transcripts and we actually didn't even have transcripts. So then I called your old school and they said you were kicked out for disorderly conduct. And I'm like, how did he transfer over? What is happening? And she goes, that kid's skull is fractured. You could have killed him. Like, sit down. And he's like, I won't sit down. And he throws everything off of Kristen Chenoweth's desk in a way that you would think he would grab her and bang her, but just like, anger. And she says, I see a pattern of disturbing behavior, poor impulse control. And he stops her and he goes, you know what I see? A pathetic old woman who's trying to look and act like something she's not, something
Yeesh.
she'll never be. All she really is a dried up, dirty fucking C word. And Kristen Chenoweth is so shook, but has the energy to slap him across the face. But he grabs her hand and he storms out. And she's like, you're expelled. I'm like, expelled? He should be in prison. He fractured a kid's skull. What are you talking about? That night, they're getting ready for the big dance. And she hands Kevin, J-Lo, this yellow rose. And she goes, give it to your date. She's going to love it. And they get to the dance and he hands her the rose and she's like, oh my God, I'm so excited to be here with you. And she goes, oh my God, by the way, J-Lo, a bunch of guys came up to me. We were talking at the punch bowl and there's like water running in the bathroom or something and they couldn't stop it. And she's like, oh my God, I'll go check it out. So she drops off, she goes to the bathroom and all of the sinks are overflowing with water and the lights overhead are flickering. I mean, it's screaming danger. I would have just left it. I would have been like, not my problem. And spray painted on the wall, it says, I banged J-Lo. And Ryan Guzman emerges and is like, we need to talk. He's furious with her behavior, banging her husband potentially. And he attempts to assault her. He like slams her up against the wall. He's trying to bang her. She finally like knees him in the crotch and she's like, you think you can scare me with some graffiti? My word against yours. Stay away. She can't sleep that night. She's tossing and turning. She hears music blasting next door. She's like, ugh, Ryan Guzman. She gets up to close the windows, and across the way, naked Ryan Guzman, but naked girl from the hardware store.
Mm-hmm.
Kevin's date literally blows Ryan Guzman, and J-Lo is like, closes the blinds. The next day, J-Lo arrives at class and everyone's waiting outside and the door is locked. And she's like, I'm so sorry, I was running a few minutes behind. She unlocks the door, she opens it, and inside there are photos everywhere of her and Ryan Guzman banging. And it's like photos on the wall, they're all over the floor, they're taped like a banner across the middle of the room. And on the chalkboard is a quote that says, once more I must bring what is dark to light. Oedipus the king. It's like, oh my God. She gathers up all the photos. The class is waiting outside. The principal is like, what's going on in there? She's frantically gathering all these pictures. He's trying to get his key. He's like, can't find which key it is. And she's like, ah, flailing around, getting all the pictures. He tells her, he's like, get it together. He opens the door. She finally gets like the last picture. And she's like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I had a really personal phone call. And he's like, you need to get it together. Your behavior. And I'm like, her behavior? Shouldn't you be concerned that Ryan Guzman nearly killed a child on premise? Meanwhile, John Corbett arrives to pick up Kevin from school. And he's like, Kevin, I want you to drive my Dodge Charger, the purple one.
The purple one.
And Kevin starts driving. And of course, he's like being reckless. He's like, I've already been driving. Ryan Guzman has been showing me how to drive. And he's like furious with his dad. And he's driving recklessly. And he's like, you hurt mom. And he's like going 100 miles per hour around like the Hollywood Hills. He's like waving around. And then all of a sudden, he's like, okay, you need to stop. Stop the car. And he's like, can't stop though. He's hitting the brakes. And of course, the brake lines were probably cut by Ryan Guzman. Classic. Never drive your car when you're dealing with a psychotic ex that you banged. So there's no clutch. They're swerving all over. He's like, slam on the emergency brake. And he do, but then they slam into those yellow garbage cans that are on highways to like break up medians. The water explodes and they survive, but they also bond through that terrible experience. And J-Lo gets home and sees that the purple car is like totally effed up, like, a mess. She runs inside screaming, what happened? Oh my God. And she hears him being like, it was just a fender bender. We're totally fine. We're okay. And of course, Ryan Guzman is sitting on the couch. And she's like, ah, ah. And she goes into the kitchen, and Ryan is like, I'll get chips. And he goes in there, and she turns to him. She goes, you took pictures? And he goes, actually, I took video. Yeah. Come over tonight. We can talk about it. I'll let you have it if you make a deal with me. She's like, go fuck yourself, Ryan Guzman. He's like, I'd rather F you, J-Lo. And he tries to grab her, and he like hits him. All while they're just sitting in the room next door. And he goes, who should I show it to first? John Corbett? Should I show it to Kevin? And she's like, stop it. I'll come over tonight. He finally leaves. That night, she goes to his house after he basically blackmails her to talk. And she goes to his room. She's like, where's the video? Like, this is real life. You're terrible. You're a monster. Like, what is your plan? What do you think is going to happen? Like, do you think we're going to date? Do you think I'm just going to be like in love with you after this? And yes, you're 20 and I can legally bang you, but like, no. And he's like, here, nothing. No, but there's a big world out there. We can leave. And she's like, you're crazy. He's like, I'm giving you the video. I'll give it to you because I want you to watch the video because it's real love. And he's like, look, none of it will see the light of day. If I show you what's possible, I will never, ever let you go. And he like tries to kiss her and she slaps him and she's like, you're psychotic. She runs out. The next day, J-Lo finally bears the cross to Kristen Chenoweth. She's like, remember Ryan Guzman, the guy who fractured that kid's skull and is like psychotic and loves the Iliad? Kristen Chenoweth is like, yeah, I remember him. She's like, I banged him. She's like, he's psychotic. I thought it was going to blow over. And now I found out that he has video of us banging and I'm going to lose my job and my life, and my husband. And Kristen Chenoweth is like, no one is going to see that video. We cut to, quote, J-Lo leaving school. And of course, Ryan Guzman is dangerously close following her in his oversized truck. And the car is clearly trying to lose him, excuse me. And the car is like, they're all weaving in and out of Los Angeles traffic going 20 miles per hour in standstill traffic on the highway. And so finally, as he's trying to catch up, we learn that a knife slits through like one of those side doors, and it's J-Lo breaking into the house to go and, of course, retrieve the video. Ryan Guzman finally catches up, and we realize it's, of course, Kristen Chenoweth driving her car, leading him away from home. And he sees it, and he literally whips over the median with his oversized truck, whips back, and starts take off driving. She calls J-Lo and is like, look, he figured it out. You have like 5 minutes tops. LA time means 20. She immediately finds the camera in the living room that's hidden in the clock. She then like is looking around. She doesn't see anything in his room. And then all of a sudden, 2015, she finds a hard-lined internet cord. She's like, this must be it. She follows it down to the basement. She goes down there. And I'm like, you don't have time. That took you 5 minutes to follow your hands down the internet cord to be like, where does it go?
Now you're in the basement.
I know, like, and now, yeah, exactly. Have you seen Scream? Don't go further into the home. Downstairs are printed out 1 million photos of J-Lo, a pillow and a blanket where he's probably just laying around jerking off to all the photos. Unclear what's going on down there. Conveniently on his desktop is a folder that says J-Lo video, font size 1 million. She drags it over to the trash can and is like, delete forever. It's deleting like 178 items. And then she notices in size 100 million font, Dodge Challenger. And she's like, what? She clicks on it. It's instructions about the brakes and how they're all set up. She nearly dies. It's like, you didn't put that together, you idiot. She then sees a folder that says minivan 2006. She's like, huh. She gets it deleted. She runs upstairs and is startled by the near-dead uncle. Ah! As he's around the corner, who looks flawless considering he just had a bone marrow transplant and has been in a wheelchair and borderline walking at this point. But she makes it home. Everything is locked. She calls Kristen Chenoweth and is like, I deleted the files, but does your loser cop boyfriend know any cops in San Bernardino? Because I have a hunch. Someone starts banging at the door, and J-Lo grabs the knife, but it's just Kevin. She's like, on edge. They both calm down, and Kristen is like, just come out here and stay with me. Like, I don't think you should be home tonight. She's like, I think you're right. She's like, I'm going to go run this errand. I'll get back to you. They hang up. Boom. Kristen Chenoweth is hit over the head with a wrench by Ryan Guzman, who's been hiding in her house the whole time.
Of course.
Meanwhile, J-Lo heads to San Bernardino. We learn that his parents were in a minivan. They lost control and were hit by an 18-wheeler carrying a gasoline, of course, classic. The cars exploded. The detective is like, we believe that he was intoxicated because the other cars on the road were like, he was weaving and he was out of control, and like, what about the brakes? And they're like, well, the car's burnt, I can show you. And even though this was like over a year ago, there is still a charred minivan sitting at like the police station. And they're like, so the cop is like, look, case closed, okay? It's not a thing. It just like exploded and it's sad. They couldn't even do anything. She's like, was this a 2006 minivan? And he's like, yep. And she's like, great, psychotic. Meanwhile, Ryan calls Kevin and is like, hey, I'm fixing a tractor for Kristen Chenoweth, and there's something going wrong. I really need your help. And he's like, well, I'm getting out to dinner with my dad tonight. It's like, well, could you guys both come by? I could use both of your hands. And they're like, sure, we'll drive right over. Anyways, he has Kristen Chenoweth tied up. And he tells her that she has a temper and that he has a temper. And he's like, sometimes the temper gets the best of me. And he's like, but I feel like I'm being bullied by you and J-Lo. And he's like, you guys are mean to me. And she's like tied up, just like, you're psychotic. And she's got, of course, her classic torn up True Religion jeans, flawless white shirt, even though she has like a bloody rag in her mouth and a head injury from being hit by a wrench. And the phone rings and he picks it up and he doesn't say hello. J-Lo just starts talking. Immediately the phone picks up and she's like, oh my God, I was just in San Bernardino. It's like, no hello, no nothing. Just, here's all the evidence. The car was on fire. They think he was a drunk driver, but I know for a fact that Ryan Guzman probably tampered with the brakes on the parents' minivan. That's why it crashed. She's like, and I think he did the same thing to John Corbett. He is psychotic. And then Ryan Guzman holds up a recorder that is a robot Kristen Chenoweth voice that says, I think we need to talk. Come over, and then hangs up. And J-Lo's like, huh, okay. Not suspect at all. J-Lo drives up in a tiny yellow Mini Cooper because she's in Kristen Chenoweth's car. And she gets there and the power's out. And she's like, that's weird. And is like wandering around the house with her flashlight on her phone when a cat, meow, scares her. And she's like, ah! Boom. Kristen Chenoweth's body, where her throat has been slit, falls out of a pantry right onto the ground. She goes screaming, running outside, calls 911, but boom, is of course hit by Ryan Guzman. He grabs her. He takes her out, drags her by her beautiful J-Lo hair, drags her out to the barn. She's like, you killed Kristen Chenoweth. And he's like, I'm protecting you. This is what heroes do. And she goes, do heroes kill their mother and father? And he's like, I would have never hurt my mother. I loved my mother, but she killed herself. You know, my father was cheating. And when we got like a moment of the van, it was like the dad with a woman that we just assumed was Ryan Guzman's mom, but it's really some woman that he was having an affair with. And he cut the brakes to kill them. But because of the sadness on his mom, she killed herself. And he's like, my cheating father and his whore got what they deserved, but I protect the people I love, and I'm doing this all for you. Once they get to the barn, inside are Kevin and John Corbett, both tied up. Kevin's tied up. John Corbett's been beaten and is tied up. And Kevin's like, don't hurt my mom. And he's like, I love your mother. And she's like, babe, just breathe. Because remember, asthmatic. It's very much like Signs, like let's breathe together in unison. And he points with his head down to his mom that there's like a tool right next to him, like a tire iron or something. And Ryan is going off about how he would never hurt Kevin, that he's going to be a great father to Kevin. But he's also like, but I don't know. I don't think we should take Kevin with us because he's kind of like his father. And J-Lo's like, no, you're a great dad. And like, you've done so much great stuff for Kevin. Are you kidding me? He's like, so great. And I love the idea of us forming a little family. And he's like, really? And then she hits him, of course, with the tire iron. He falls. She starts trying to untie John Corbett, but he again grabs her by J-Lo's beautiful hair, yanks her and drags her to the ground. Kevin is attempting to untie himself. And they're all trying to yell at Ryan. Ryan is like trying to grab her and kiss her. It's like, now is not the time, Ryan Guzman. The kissing is not going to work. He's so upset that she rejects him that he starts grabbing gasoline and just dumping it all over the barn. And it's like, we're going to have a funeral pyre like in the Iliad. It's like, shut up drop the Iliad act. And he's furious that J-Lo doesn't see this as a moment of love. And he says, either you live with me or you die with them. And he throws his lighter onto the floor, setting the entire place ablaze. Even though the lighter was like basically at his foot, the entire barn lights up within like 0.5 seconds. And she's screaming while Kevin and John Corbett are both attempting to get loose. And Ryan is choking J-Lo. John Corbett finally breaks free, but Ryan Guzman has his uncle's old pistol literally in like gun holders, gun slings under his arms. And he shoots John Corbett right in the shoulder. And J-Lo is like holding on to John Corbett, who's on the ground now, and is like, stay with me. And Ryan is like, come with me. There's nothing I wouldn't do for you. And he's like, turns to her and he goes, J-Lo, come with me. You can trust me. And at this point, what we hadn't seen is that she had gotten, of course, the EpiPen from her son, Kevin.
Mm-hmm.
And she's now taken the cap off. It's like behind her. And he's like, you can trust me. And she goes, yeah, but you can't trust me. Goes up and stabs Ryan Guzman in the eye. Okay, the Odyssey. Oedipus. Don't even. He's running and screaming with a needle / EpiPen hanging out of his eye. He starts shooting the gun wildly, as Kevin did. He pulls the EpiPen out. She tackles him, though. They're finding he's trying to choke her. She's trying to choke him. The whole room is engulfed with flames. She takes her 2 fingers and jams them into his blind eye. Kevin then hits him with a shovel. They fight. He grabs the gun, but Ryan Guzman stomps on Kevin's hand. He grabs the gun to shoot Kevin, and J-Lo yells, Ryan, no! And he turns to her, and she drops the old car engine that we saw in the first 5 minutes of the movie on his head, literally exploding him in half. The family, J-Lo, John Corbett, Kevin, they walk out just as 911 is arriving. And they get into the ambulance together. John Corbett's shot in the chest. Don't worry about it. He's walking out fine. Adrenaline. The end. We get our credits. Gary Gorman, come on.
Well, another fine submission in the creepy neighbor category.
I love it.
I love as you watch, in all those movies, it tends to ramp, when it starts to ramp up, things go from creepy to crazy.
0 to
so
psychotic.
quickly.
Yeah. Like so insane. And also like the Iliad references are so funny. They're iconic.
They made it very highbrow because referencing Homer all the time.
I feel like J-Lo was like, well, if I'm going to be in this, I need it to be more about like really leaning into the classics.
Yeah.
I'm elevating it by putting on my glasses in certain scenes and reading books. We should go full throttle. So iconic film, The Boy Next Door. I love it so much. It's weirdly violent and sexual, like these long sex scenes, tons of naked Ryan Guzman. It's like, whoa. So it's like a hard R, I believe, The Boy Next Door. It's not your classic sort of PG-13 low-grade erotic thriller. This one slaps. So go check it out. Incredible film, 12% on Rotten Tomatoes, should be 1,200%. Gary Gorman has been my guest. Thank you, as always, Gary, for joining me.
Thank you, Julia. It's always great to be here.
And guys, you can send me an email by any means, allspoilerrecap@gmail.com, or anywhere you can find podcasts, including YouTube now. So go check that out, and we'll see you on Monday. Bye.